Welcome to Conversations with the Smith Family. I'm Doug Taylor, the CEO of the Smith Family, and in this series, we're diving into critical conversations around education, how people experience poverty, and the challenges that young people face. We're talking to big thinkers and innovators about the solutions that all young people need to thrive at school and beyond. Now, today I'm really pleased to announce that our special guest is Steve Biddulph AM. Steve has been a family psychologist for over 30 years and is among the world's best known parenting authors and educators. You know, his books have sold over 6 million copies, been printed in 31 languages, and I read somewhere that someone buys one of his books every 3 minutes. So his impact is absolutely significant. He's an Australian Father of the Year and a member of the Order of Australia. And I'll be talking to Steve today about the importance of role models in shaping a young person's education journey so they can thrive at school and beyond. That's something that's really important to us at the Smith Family. And I would just add my personal thanks to you, Steve. I've read many of your books on manhood, on the importance of making good male friendships and living with purpose. And as a father of 2 daughters, reading your books about raising girls and how to help them experience joy and build great peer relationships. So welcome again, Steve. It's wonderful to have you joining us today. The Smith Family is an education children's charity, and so we really believe in the power of education to have a positive impact on people's lives. And so we're very interested in people's education journey. So could you share with us your most memorable education moment? If you can reduce it to one moment, what comes to mind for you?
Sure, Doug, and hello to you and hello to everyone who's listening. It's great to have this chance to have a yak with you. I think I was about 13 or 14, so mid-high school, and there was a talk around the school among the teachers that they maybe should start school cadets in my government high school. And I think the Vietnam War was just looming, and perhaps there was government money to do cadets, which was basically to get boys ready to be cannon fodder. But our teachers saw a bigger picture and they refused to do that. And so the headmaster said, well, what else can we do? Because these are kids, it's a working class suburb of Melbourne. They don't have much of a life. Lives are very narrow and restricted. Someone had heard about the Duke of Edinburgh's award. And that was a scheme set off across the British Commonwealth where kids in schools could go off and with the interested teachers be taken hiking and get to do athletics. And so we got to do a bunch of things after school with teachers who volunteered to do it with us. So they were the teachers who cared. You know, they didn't knock off at 3. They said, yeah, we'll put in a couple of hours on a Wednesday afternoon and a few weekends. So we got to meet our teachers doing things we had never dreamt of. And so when you asked that question, that was what it was, when the teachers stepped up and some adults showed interest.
Yeah, fantastic. So look, you've taken that in a really interesting direction, because often when we ask this question, maybe because it's how it's framed around education, people often go to the formal education institutional environment. And you're rightly calling out the fact that so much of our learning happens outside of that. And it's role models that really unlock that power. And, you know, at the Smith Family, obviously we're focused on the in-school experience and ensuring that young people have the opportunity to make the most of their education. But we also know how incredibly important role models are, parents and carers and other adults in people's lives. And so we do a lot of work with parents and carers, of course, but then mobilizing people to act as volunteers and mentoring young people and providing other sorts of experiences. And you've kind of gone there in that answer, but could you go a bit further in terms of what are the kind of qualities of role models that you think really cuts through for young people in their growth and development?
Yes. Well, first of all, it's a term that people use a bit carelessly, really, because when you unpack how it works, to become a human being that's even half realized, to become something close to your potential, doesn't just happen. You don't just throw in food and clean t-shirts. There has to be this thing where what we're doing as we're growing up is we're gathering the kinds of people that we want to become. So if you're a boy, you're gathering different kinds of masculinity. If you're a girl, different kinds of femininity, and whatever gender, just different kinds of humanity. Because if you think about the qualities that are going to make a kid's life go well, they're things like patience, or kindness, or perseverance, good sense of humor. If you have those, your life goes well. If you don't, you have an awful life. And so a thing like patience, you can't just say to a kid, "Oh, be patient, be more patient," because because that doesn't tell you how to do it. Does that make sense,
Yeah.
Doug? Yeah. And so if you break it down, patience, it's a way of breathing. It's a way of dropping your shoulders and kind of settling in, you know, thinking, my little sister needs mum's attention now. Um, or I can't watch the TV show till when they're finished on the computer games. There's no point in revving up. It works better if I just kind of drop that, and I'm patient, and I kind of hang on to my goal, but I know that I'll get to it down the track. Now, that is such a complex, multifaceted skill that the only way we can ever acquire it is if we are around someone who we like, who likes us, and is patient.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yes, I'm glad that makes
Yeah.
sense. And
Yeah.
so we take it in whole. There were if there were people in my life who were the first people to be kind to me, and so I swallowed them whole. I've got those people in me now. If I want to do kind, that's what I draw on. And it's largely unconscious. There's things called mirror neurons in our nervous system, which take other people's behavior and we make it our own. And so, of course, if you see violence, my wife Sharon was raised with a lot of violence, and so when we had our first child, she noticed when things got really heated, she could feel in her arms and her shoulders. One day, this happened very vividly. That urge to haul back and belt, which is what she experienced dozens and dozens of times. It was startling to feel it like mapped into your body. And because she noticed it, and she just thought, wow, let that go. And we committed a lot of our lives to, letting people know violence, hitting kids doesn't even work, but it's also just horrible to be on the end of. And so they can be bad role models, of course, but just illustrating how vividly we take in other people. And so what you're doing in the Smith family is you're putting kids around a breadth of role models.
Yes. Yes.
And for your volunteers and your mentors and the school teachers to know, when you're just being yourself around kids, laughing with them, being a bit vulnerable, saying, I'm going to be sad today. My mum's really sick. And so if I'm not really quite all that lively, that's the reason. And those kids are going, whoa, they have a mum. Their
Yeah.
mum is sick.
Yeah.
They're talking about that to us. That's kind of like, like
Yes.
lightning flash.
Mhm.
And so, but it's kind of a paradox because it's just being ourselves.
Yes.
Um,
Thanks. That makes so much sense. And where you started, that word of patience, and I as I heard you speak, I was thinking about really being present and open to the person that you're connecting with, and such an important foundation for a good learning environment, be it at home, be it in a classroom. That's really the fodder, if you like, the
yeah.
ground in which things grow and develop over time. It's critical.
Yes. And just to properly answer the question, in a kid's life, when things go well, there's a three-part sort of process, like stepping stones, and it's usually mum and then dad, and then about the age of 14, it broadens out to mentors,
Yeah.
mentors with boys, auntie figures for girls.
Yes.
So when kids have had a rough time, maybe sometimes even mum hasn't worked out. They haven't experienced a woman who's tender and settled and kind. They might have mum, of course, their mum loves them, but she might be just too frantic to really connect. And so sometimes when we used to map planning for a young person, we'd say, right, where do we begin? They need mothering first. Couple of years in, they need some fathering. Um, Male figures who are respectful and safe. And then even in the most absolutely well-supported family, by age 12 in a girl, 14 in a boy, they get really sick of mum and dad. And
Yes.
it's a, and it's a, and it's a healthy, really important stage of casting a wider net.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so right, mum's loves me, but I don't want to. I don't want to be my
No.
mum. I don't want to turn into my mum. It's very heartbreaking. But my really cool auntie, who is
Yes.
is just she's what I want to be, and
Yes.
and so it's like this is so biologically part of the human pattern that there's a place, like there's a place in your brain for uncle, a place in your brain for auntie. And school teachers sometimes, if they're very good, they can step into that place, but it's a deep yearning. And the young person, without whether they know it or not, they will just kind of like latch, oh, I can remember just being mesmerized by different a science teacher who was just so interesting, older therapist, psychiatrist friend who just seemed to be so amazing at his job. I just wanted to watch him how he did his job. And another woman therapist who I hung around for 2 weeks and changed me completely, watching how she worked. So it's lifelong as well. It's not just teens. Yeah.
Yeah, look, great insights. I was actually just talking to a colleague today about her experience with her daughters, and she said, growing up, it was like I was a jelly bean. They wanted me. I was a sugar. I was sweet. Now I'm Brussels sprouts. Only if I have to. So, and it's that kind of changing, which is just part of that expansion of a child's
Yeah.
network. Steve,
Yes.
it's a
Yes.
wonderful idea. Steve, thinking about your writings and research over time, and perhaps more recently, we're learning a lot more about the contemporary challenges that young people are experiencing. And we've been focused on that at the Smith family because we know those challenges have a big impact on a child and on their educational pathways and outcomes. But thinking about what we were learning about mental health issues, the experience of COVID, for us at the Smith family, the cost of living impacts on families and households. I'm wondering if there's one of those challenges that you'd highlight to us in particular for young people who experience disadvantage. What would be the one that you encourage us to focus in on in addressing?
Okay, now the one that of course matters most is cost of living pressures and safe housing and it's very hard to be relaxed around and safe when parents are stressed to the max. But that's not my area of expertise. And so the thing that where I can help as a psychologist is that one of the consequences of rising stresses in families is that anxiety levels rise. And I've now come to believe, and this has become my kind of last stage of my life mission in a way, is that anxiety has become this, I call it the second biggest problem on the planet. Climate change is the biggest, but anxiety comes close second, and they're not completely separate. But we've been managing anxiety completely the wrong way, both in the psychology profession and also just as a culture. So my last book, which is called Wild Creature Mind, is having talked to colleagues all over the world and got very interested in particularly how our brain works. That it turns out that one side of our brain, the thinking in words side, the left side, handles things by words and by thinking. And it's spectacularly unhelpful when we're anxious because our thoughts go round and round and round. And that basically you can't think your way out of anxiety. We know that's a problem because the word, if you do a word search of the word most often associated with anxiety, the word comes in front of it is crippling. Crippling anxiety, because the effect of it feels awful. Many people listening will either have anxiety or will know some. 1 in 3 people, including kids, has that condition. It feels dreadful. You just can't face the world and you can't function You can't speak, or you shake, or you go dizzy, and so it's hammering this generation, and it wasn't so a generation ago, and the response from the psychology world has been patently inadequate. Otherwise, we would have solved it. And what generally people sort of referred to as cognitive therapy, which is you try and talk people out of feeling anxious. You use logic to try and persuade them. Now, nice try, but in fact, the latest brain science says that the other half of our brain, which doesn't think in words, which is basically our wild animal side, is very wide to our bodies. There's a great big nerve that runs down into our trunk, our heart, our lungs, our belly, our tummy, even our throat and our face. And that part of the brain is primarily to do with sending messages to the body and receiving messages back. And also it manages what we see and hear as well, and our memory banks in our hippocampus. That's a bit of a rush, but that's the way it's set up. So if something is not right in our world, what we'll experience is something happening down here in our tummy. Your little kid's anxious. They don't say, "I'm anxious, Mum." They say, "My tummy hurts." A teenager will be cranky or explosive, or shut themselves in their room. And when we want to help a kid and they say they're worried, of course you talk about the reasons and things, but the most helpful thing turns out to be to say, where does it live? Where in you does the anxiety live? And instead of saying, "I am anxious," say, "Something in me is anxious." And as soon as you begin that, it's like, okay, it's you get a little bit of spaciousness between you and the body sensations. And then instead of fighting your sort of twitching tummy, or the feeling like you're going to throw up, instead of fighting it or pushing it away, you make some space for it. And what'll happen, because I used to wake in anxiety attacks into my early 60s, in the middle of the night, and if you pay attention to your body and you make it welcome, and we tell kids like it's like a wild creature inside you. You have to look after it, and if you notice it and you're kind to it, 9 out of 10 times it'll go away, because right now you're safe. Right now, you're not being bullied. Right now, you're not having to do an exam. You're safe for now. But 1 time in 10, what'll happen is it'll become very, very clear something needs to be done. I need help with this, with the school, or someone has to help me stand up to these bullies, or someone has to tell my mum this, that she needs to know, and to change what's going on. And so the body sensations are a message from one side of your brain that knows a lot. And when you listen to them, things will pop in. And so it's a kind of it's a way to get both sides of your mind working together. In the Wild Creature book, there's a story of a girl who has enormous anxiety, on the brink of being hospitalized. When she sees a very caring older woman therapist, it turns out that in fact she doesn't go from anxious to relaxed. She goes from anxious to kind of blazing fury, because she and her friends are being sexually harassed by some older boys at the bus stop of her school. And she just gets so, incandescent rage when it starts to come out of her. And she and her friends tell their parents, they take action, the schools take action, driven by the help she was given to convert. Does that make you see where Doug goes?
Identified. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. That example is really prescient at the moment, because when we look at data across all education systems in OECD countries, attendance rates have been declining, and they were declining before COVID. COVID shone a light on it, but we've seen that, and it's obviously, when we looked at what's underpinning that, you certainly see the cost of living, financial pressures. That means that a young person doesn't want to go to school if they don't have lunch like their peers. but and obviously what's happening in the school context, but it is often the well-being anxiety issues that so many young people and families are grappling with that leads young people to disengage from education, and without stepping it through and addressing it as you've outlined and helping equally schools to support people to think about this as well,
Yeah.
again, affects that education and an educational kind of pathway, because we know it, lack of attendance affects achievement and affects completion. So it does come down to these really fundamental experiences for young people. And, your book, Wild Creature Mind, really articulates that very powerfully, as you have today, Steve. Steve, there are many challenges, and you're at a stage of life where you've kind of no doubt reflected on that over time. And I'm sure you can think about the challenges of the future. But I'd love to hear from you what gives you hope about the future as well, in terms of how you think about that. And, we very much think about the families and the young people that we're supporting. But how do you think about that in the future?
Yeah, well, to be totally open with you, I'm very um, afraid for the future. Um, Not for myself, for my generation. We're leaving the scene pretty soon, but 10, 20 years, the picture looks very bad, and it's mostly down to climate. And how that makes countries collapse and massive refugee flows and starvation, awful things. But I'm inclined to hope because what I've seen is that in tough times, something seems to happen with some people, that some people dissolve into hate and fear. And we've seen that in the United States, but that always implodes. Hate and fear, you can't build anything on hate and fear. When people make alliances based on caring and particularly putting others first, the kind of joy that comes from not being a big deal in your own point of view. You can build something on positivity, and even people who may be a bit shy, a bit doubtful, will come alongside if you're building something on positivity. Their hearts are drawn to it, and so. In tough times, we start alliances begin just as I'm talking to you today. Alliances are built, um, and they're enduring, um, and they're good-hearted, and so they're energized. And it's a slim hope, but it's our only hope, and so that's where I'm putting that's where I'll put my 10 bob.
It's a it's
Yeah.
it's a good place to put it, I think, Steve. And look, if in closing I can just play back to you, as you use the word good-hearted energy, on behalf of so many parents and carers and mentors across the world who benefited from your writing, your research, your thought leadership and speaking and practice. Thanks so much. We've all greatly benefited from those wonderful insights, as we have today again. And this will be a wonderful thing for us to share with our team members in particular, and the work that they're doing with students and families right across Australia and others and our supporters. So, Steve, thanks so much for your wonderful leadership and contribution, and we really do appreciate your time today. Thank you.
I'm really delighted to work with all of you in the Smith family. I've admired you for as long as I can remember, so it's great to finally meet. So thank you, and hi, love to everyone. Hope we talk again sometime.
Thank you for joining us for Conversations with the Smith Family. If you'd like to learn more about these conversations or the Smith Family, go to thesmithfamily.com.au.